Hey, welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study and our study of Abraham. This is our 13th installment, and I call this one Isaac and Ishmael. Last time, if you recall, a couple times ago, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, and then last time we saw that Abraham makes a new home south of where he'd been, to a place called Gerar, a kingdom with a king named Abimelech. This story unfolded where, similar to the one back in Genesis 12, he claims that he, Abraham, and Sarah, his wife, are brother and sister. He's deceitful and you could say he's cowardly. The same consequence occurs where the leader takes Sarah. Back then it was the Pharaoh, this time it's the king. So what happened to Abraham's faith in God's divine protection? Maybe the only thing good about it is we see that Abraham isn't a perfect saint. Even the great Abraham makes mistakes. Even the great Abraham sometimes forgot to rely on God and do it himself. So this was a story of making mistakes and God forgiving. Relying on our own solutions when we should rely on God, and ultimately of God's protection. Today, in the next chapter, we have some good news, and this is chapter 21 of Genesis. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. And what was that? Verse 2, Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. After so much build-up, it's surprising how little is devoted to this birth. It's so significant. A triple reminder is even mentioned in those first two verses that God did what he promised. You see that mentioned 3 times there. Without a son, none of the long-term promises to Abraham of land, numerous descendants, blessing to the nations could be fulfilled. Isaac's birth to an incredibly old couple proves the reliability of God's promises. Like God said himself back in chapter 18, nothing is too hard for the Lord. Some things to remember about God's promises. God never forgets or retracts his word. I put some up here. If God makes a promise, it will be done. And God is in no hurry. God doesn't operate on our timetables. Remember, it's been 25 years since Abraham left Haran after God made his promise. 25 years later, that was God's timetable. I'm sure it was not Abraham and Sarah's. God and we must wait for God's appointed time. And so, something to always remember, sometimes there's waiting involved. The wait may be longer than we expected. Okay, let's continue with the story. Get things a little bit out of order here, but there we go. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So we see that Abraham responded in faith by naming his child and having him circumcised. The name Isaac means he laughs. He laughs. The next verses explain why this name was chosen in verse 6. Let's get past that. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So Sarah's tickled what has come about. She and Abraham have a son, and that son is named He Laughs. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham was mocking. That son's name was Ishmael, you'll recall. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. So it looks like we're in store for some more drama here. Weaning in Bible times often did not take place till children were 2 or 3. So one purpose of the big feast was to declare that the son was the heir apparent. He was the inheritor. This would put Ishmael to be at least 15 years old. If you do the math, Abraham was 86 when Ishmael was born. He's 100 when Isaac was born. So unfortunately, Sarah's joy turned sour when she saw Ishmael mocking. Exactly what Ishmael was doing is unclear. Possibly Ishmael was making fun of Isaac's status as Abraham's heir. This Ishmael has been trouble for Sarah from the beginning. Ironic that his existence was her idea. Another irony is that earlier Sarah had mistreated Hagar. Now Hagar's son was mistreating Sarah's son. When Sarah mistreated Hagar, Hagar ran away, and now Sarah wanted both Hagar and Ishmael out of their lives. Hagar's the mother, Ishmael's the son. Another important issue, it's well-established custom in the patriarchal times that the rights of any child born to a man by a slave woman were protected, though the son of the wife was a man's legal heir, that would be Isaac. His child by a concubine was also guaranteed an inheritance, that would be Ishmael. Sarah's demand that he send Ishmael away was doubly troubling for Abraham. He loved Ishmael, his first son. Sending Ishmael away would be morally wrong according to custom. Abraham was in a tough spot. We're going to see that God intervenes again. And in verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So here Abraham, he was upset, he was grieved. One translation said he exploded in anger that the matter distressed Abraham. Ishmael was his son after all, but when God spoke, it became more than just Sarah's proposal, and God needed to be obeyed. God's reassurances that Ishmael's descendants would become a great nation also helped move Abraham to do what he did. And what did Abraham do? In verse 14, early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Why early in the morning? Well, probably so they could get somewhere shaded by the afternoon. It was hot there in the desert. This skin of water, I found that curious, was a vessel formed of the entire skin of a lamb sewn up, with the legs for handles and usually carried over the shoulder. So Hagar and her son, with some water, were banished. Before we move on, notice that they were wandering in the desert. She went on her way and wandered in the desert. In other words, they were lost. They didn't have a destination. Doesn't look good. What happens next? When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. So imagine mom and son both exhausted from fatigue and thirst. Hagar lays her son down under a bush and moves away from him. Imagine her grief at knowing her son wasn't going to make it. She didn't want to have to see it. But there was something that happened earlier that maybe Hagar forgot. Back when she ran away from Sarah earlier, God spoke to her. God asked her where she was going. Hagar answered, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai. And then this back in Genesis 16. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now with child, and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. So that was then. Apparently she had forgotten that. Again, we could look at her and say, oh, why did you forget about that? I mean, you should have known you were going to be protected, but doesn't that happen to us too when we get into a situation? We often forget the promises, the blessings that were already bestowed on us. It's a human thing. So things are not looking so positive now until in verse 17, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. So God repeated his earlier promises, saying, "For I will make him into a great nation." It would be for Ishmael. God directed her to water, and they were both saved. God kept his word to Hagar from earlier. And more recently, remember, when he promised Abraham that his son from his maidservant would become a nation. I look at this story as a reminder that God keeps his promises. God uses supernatural, but also natural means to carry out his plan. In this case, the water in the desert being a necessity for survival, we will never know, but was that water well there the whole time? That well of water there the whole time? Just not seen by Hagar? Or did it miraculously appear? Either way, God provided. All right, to tie up the story of Ishmael, the writer gives us proof of a happy ending. Verse 20, God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. So Ishmael made it through the ordeal and apparently grew up. He gets married and starts a family. Ishmael does indeed become the start of a great nation. The descendants of Ishmael are known to this day. You know who we're talking about? You've certainly heard of them. It's the Islamic nation, the Muslims. A thing that the Muslim world and the Jewish Christian world have in common, they both share Abraham as the quote-unquote father of nations, the father of nations. Okay, that's where we're going to end it here. Next time the story will concentrate on Abraham and his son Isaac. In the meantime, you all take care, be safe, and may the Lord be with you.